I'm a PhD student and I can't actually remember the last time I sat down to read a paper. And that's not great considering I actually need to read something in order to write my thesis. And it's not that I don't have the time, I don't. But I think it's because my Zotero and Obsidian have just become too unorganized for me to manage. In this video, we're going to be tackling the huge, messy digital pile of papers I have stored on my laptop, and I'll be showing you an app that I'll be using to make my reading list a lot more manageable and almost kind of motivating for me to read. So my usual process is to just download and dump papers that I find into Zotero, and clearly not do anything else with them after. And when I first started my PhD, I had this whole system of different files for different topics, and I would use tags to flag papers that I've already read or papers that I need to read. But I've stopped doing this and I've been really struggling to find anything I want in Zotero. And if I do need to cite something, it's almost easier for me to go and search the paper up again on Google Scholar. And not to mention, I've completely lost track of the papers that I wanted to actually go through and read in the first place. So at this point, it's very overwhelming for me to even try. Now, because I struggle to remember what I read, in the ideal world, I'll be taking notes in Obsidian. And I did come up with an Obsidian template to try and integrate my notes and highlights from Zotero into Obsidian. But it was a pretty manual process, and I needed to remember to sync it every time in Obsidian. And I also needed to remember my very complicated highlighting scheme. And now, because my Zotero is a mess, the way I use Obsidian is also a bit of a mess. And this is where Bookfusion comes in. They reached out to me about their app, and it sounded to me like the perfect solution to keeping my papers a lot more organized. And it also seems like there's a much smoother Obsidian integration compared to Zotero as well. So I wanted to try it out. So far, I've tested this app on a small group of papers, and whilst I'm in the process of uploading the rest of my paper library, I wanted to show you guys how this app works and how I'm going to be using it to organize my PhD reading list. Because it is designed to be used as an ebook reader. You get this nice gallery view. It's very visual. And although Bookfusion has focused on ebooks so far, they are centered on knowledge management as a whole, and there's plans to support more content types. For example, a new feature that they're planning to release this year is a web clipper for articles, which will make it easier to save articles directly. And the biggest draw for me is that it tracks what you are currently reading, what you've read, and what you plan to read. And also there's a bunch of other options to organize your library as well. And this is what my bookshelf looks like so far. These are all journal articles, and there's also some theses. And you can't see all of the titles like you normally would on a reference manager like Zotero. But this is kind of nice, as I feel like it just forces me to focus on the papers that are right in front of me, to read them, take the information out of them, and then when they're done, they move to the completed tab, which is kind of motivating. And so now I'm gonna upload the rest of my papers, at least the ones that I want to keep. So far, this is pretty good at extracting the title and the authors and things like that, but some papers don't have their title properly uploaded, so I'm gonna go through and edit these as well. And in this edit screen, I can also add a paper to a bookshelf. And so far, I've just created bookshelves for each of my projects. And I also have a bookshelf for method papers because that's its whole separate category. I like that I can add a paper to multiple bookshelves to organize them. So once I'm done with a project, I can just delete that bookshelf and the paper will still be there and it'll still be in other bookshelves. And you can also add tags to papers. I think I'll be quite light on these just to not overwhelm myself, but I'm just gonna add some more specific topics to papers just to make them a bit more searchable. And some of these papers are a bit more of a priority for me to read. So I'm gonna move them to the plan to read folder. I think this feature is key for me to be able to keep up with my reading, and I can just pick out what to read next just from that subsection of things I do plan to read. Because yeah, if you've ever written a paper, you know that you're not going to get through all of the references that you've saved. There's some papers that just exist to be cited and not read. I'll show you what the reading interface looks like. I think the UI is really nice. It's really easy to navigate, and it's also really nice to have a progress bar at the bottom. So it's almost like a little push to just finish the paper in one go. And something I really love about this is that I can change the settings of the interface. So I can go into dark mode, I like this sort of like tan, grey, I don't know what to call it mode, which is a little bit easier on the eyes than the white. I think it's kind of nice to be able to make the papers look a bit more bookish and kind of romanticize your reading. If I had a Kindle, I'd definitely try using the app on the Kindle as well and just pretend I'm reading a book. And there's also a few other handy functions. You can add bookmarks for different sections. I find it handy to flag important sections like methods and discussions to be able to go back to them quite quickly, especially if it's a really long paper. But I also found that it was quite good at picking up the subheadings and creating a sort of like contents page. I think it would be good if there was a feature to specifically bookmark a certain like section of a page. Like if I wanted to bookmark a paragraph in the middle of a page, that would be quite handy. But I could always use the highlights for that. And yeah, I found the highlights feature pretty intuitive to use. You can highlight the text or screenshot certain sections, and then you can add your own note under the highlight, which I sometimes use to either categorize or summarize what I've highlighted. And there's also an option to comment and share the highlight, which I think could be useful if you're collaborating. I like that there's two ways to view the highlights. I can either view them whilst I'm in the paper and just get a summary of everything I've highlighted instead of having to reread the paper again. But then I can also get all of the highlights, and actually all of the highlights of all the papers that I've highlighted from the main page here as well. Sometimes I find it really hard to integrate different sources of information together, but when I have something written down on one page and I'm able to read it all at once, it really helps me to sort of like synthesize different things together. So I found that page quite useful. And now that we've exited the reading screen, we can see all of the papers that are currently in progress, and there's a little progress bar for each of them. And once I'm done, I can just move the paper to the completed section. And then for the papers that I've read and I really want to come back to again, I'm going to mark them to go into the favorites folder as well. So they'll be in the completed and the favorites folder. So now that I've finished adding my papers to Bookfusion, I want to connect it to Obsidian. And in the process, try to clean up whatever state my Obsidian is in at the moment. So, all right, I'm now in Obsidian and I'm gonna add the Bookfusion plugin. I first need to install the plugin. Then I need to enable it, and then I need to connect it to Bookfusion. It should then open up Bookfusion on your browser. And back in here, there's also options to sync manually or automatically. When it's syncing, it'll show a little notification and a summary when it's done. So if you've used Obsidian before and tried to get into the more complicated stuff, you probably know that you need to rely on a bunch of templates to do anything fancy. And a lot of these templates use markup code, which I have a vague sense having worked with R, but still it really doesn't come easy for me. So I love that Bookfusion has already provided the templates that you need to connect it to Obsidian. And it's also cool that you can sort of pick and choose what elements you want to be synced from Bookfusion into Obsidian. So let's have a look at what we've synced so far. The Bookfusion notes are automatically created under one folder. It syncs all of the metadata, including the title, authors, which bookshelves the paper is from, and even your progress. The rest is all of my highlights separated by the section it's located under and any of my notes underneath. And each highlight is also hyperlinked and will open at that exact page in Bookfusion, which I think would be useful as I can see myself forgetting why I've highlighted a particular section. And now that I have an almost blank slate to work with in terms of taking notes on my papers and putting them into Obsidian, I'm going to finish cleaning up. So there's a bunch of unnamed notes that are floating around. I've just created a new note every time I needed to put something down on paper. So I'm going to go through and either delete them or name them and categorize them. And I'm just going to make sure that I have a sort of like a logical folder structure as well. So I'm going to have paper notes from Fusion in one place and be automatically uploaded into there. And then I'm going to have a project folder for each of my projects. And these are going to reference the paper notes. Another thing I need to do is sort out the papers that are downloaded onto my laptop. So I did have a dedicated papers folder that I used with Zotero, but then I ended up downloading everything and keeping it in the downloads folder because I was scared that if I upload it to Zotero and then I move the file, something was going to go wrong. But now that everything's uploaded to the cloud on Bookfusion, I'm just going to delete all of these papers. So now that I've organized my papers with Bookfusion, I think I'll be able to get more out of them. I'll be able to get my reading done for once, and I'll be able to take notes in a more streamlined manner and hopefully retain more knowledge. So I encourage you to check Bookfusion out for yourself in case it could be helpful to manage your reading list. Through the link, you can also use my code YANA25 to get 25% off their paid plans. Thank you to Bookfusion for sponsoring this video, and thank you for watching. See you next time.